Dr. Atkins. Philosopher from Scotland, David Hume, pointed out that we, as human beings, don't really have any rational basis for believing in the uniformity of nature, that the future will be like the past. Dr. Atkins, as a Christian, I can believe that the future will be like the past, or that nature is uniform, because I believe that God created the universe, and this universe reflects the uniformity which God has imposed upon it through his governing. I'd like to ask, in the atheistic worldview, the presupposition that there is no God and that all we have is matter in motion, what is your basis for believing that the future will be like the past?
Dr. Atkins.
Well, I don't believe it will be like the past, because I believe in continuing evolution. I believe that the universe is expanding, and therefore the universe will, in the future, will not be like the universe in the past. I also believe, but at a deeper level, if I could respond there, on the cogency and continuity of physical law, because but physical laws are commentaries on the behavior of matter and of radiation and whatever else you want to include. And so I see, because matter and radiation don't change their character, physical laws do not change their character. I see the universe evolving into the future, changing as it goes, but the physical laws that underlie the universe will not change.
A question for Dr.
Do I
Craig?
get a counter response or not?
Go ahead, sure.
Okay. I don't think Dr. Atkins perceived the force of the question. The point of the question is that this assumption that the laws of nature remain constant into the future is precisely that. It is an unprovable assumption, which shows again that you cannot justify science scientifically. You have to begin with certain assumptions.
That's nonsense. That we can't believe that that laws remain constant. We only have to look at a distant star, a distant galaxy, where we're actually looking at the physics of 10 to the 14 years ago.
I think the point is you can't justify inductive reasoning by means...
I think we have to interrupt this, or
yes, it's
you're both so
empirical
interesting.
observation.
We could do this all night long.
Academia is supposed to be searching for truth.
Yes.
And there are various ways to search for truth. Science is the way to search for truth about the natural world. But if you're looking for truth about the spiritual world, science is the wrong set of tools. It's not going to get you there. You need there to understand the tools of the Spirit.
But is what gets you there faith? Is that it?
Ultimately, it leads you to faith. But let me say, I think this notion that faith is somehow the antithesis of reason is completely wrong.
Explain why.
So faith is, in fact, the most rational of all choices when you sort of look at the spectrum between atheism and belief. Let me tell you why. Imagine this table represents all of the knowledge that ever has existed or will exist in the universe. A lot of stuff.
Right.
And then ask any individual, where in that table is your own personal knowledge right now? And even the most confident of us will draw a tiny little circle. Now, suppose the knowledge of the existence of God is outside your tiny little circle. How then could anybody who's not a wacko say, I know there is no God? Is that not the most irrational position? Does that not require the greatest faith of all? I would argue that already in our little circle, there's evidence of the existence of some supernatural being. The Big Bang, for instance. Did the universe create itself? I don't see how that could happen.
God created the Big Bang?
Well, something outside of nature presumably had to preside over the creation of something out of nothing. And when you look at the way the universe is tuned, where all of these constants are precisely having the value that's necessary for matter to coalesce and for life to be possible, it's almost impossible that such a thing would have happened. The probabilities are infinitesimal. That sort of makes you wonder. Even Stephen Hawking, who did not come at this exactly as a believer, writes in his book, The Brief History of Time, this has religious significance. And it does. So you can look at the logical evidence and bring yourself right up to the cliff's edge of saying it makes sense that there is a God. But then you still have to decide
because
whether
you
to
can't
take
explain it in science?
You can't explain some of these things in science, and you can't answer some of the questions.
Scientists can't explain the Big Bang?
No. They can explain that it happened, but they can't say what happened before. It's a discontinuity.
What happens after we die?
Well, I believe, as somebody who has gone down this long journey of trying to understand faith, that there is something outside of what we see here. and that after we die, we'll find out a lot more about what that's like. I don't know exactly what its characteristics are going to be.
In fact,
but
you
I
have no
glimmer.
idea.
I have a glimmer.
Why do you have a glimmer?
Because I have...
I mean,
yes.
a believer would make you say,
Yep.
Because of a series of things, experiences of my own, you would say, I came to believe that, but I don't know. Nobody's spoken to me.
Sure, nobody's spoken to me either.
That's my point, yeah.
But I do think faith is not one of those emotional reactions that you carry with you the rest of your life. At least it's not for me. It is going through the evidence, as Lewis did, as I have done, as many others wiser than I have done, and coming to the conclusion, oh, look at St. Augustine, he was a wonderful model of this, that it is much more plausible to accept God's existence than the alternative. And then, once you reach that point
Plausible
of belief,
to accept God's existence.
yes. Plausible.
Plausible.
Right.
So
Again,
when you put the unexplained versus the explained, the only way you can figure out the unexplained is to say it must be God. This certain things.
I think the evidence is more consistent with that than the alternative. Again, I think agnosticism is an entirely intellectually justifiable position, which is the alternative of simply saying, I can't know. I think atheism is not a logical position. But agnosticism is a little thin. Oftentimes it is not the agnosticism of, I've considered all the evidence and I don't think it's possible to know. Oftentimes it's just like, I don't really want to deal with this. So it's more comfortable to take a position of it's unknowable, when in fact that's confusing the unknowable with what might be known if one did some more searching. And what I did when writing this book was try to describe my own pathway towards that searching as a scientist, and to argue something that I think has been lost a lot lately, that is that the scientific worldview and the spiritual worldview are entirely compatible. They coexist within me on any given Thursday afternoon. They make my practice of science more meaningful because it's also an investigation of God's creation. They make my faith more meaningful as well. And the idea that this harmonious middle ground between the extremes of shrill atheism on the one hand and fundamentalist Bible thumping saying that science can't be trusted on the other, that middle ground needs to be supported, encouraged, and young people need to know especially that it exists, because it may be hard to tell these days.
Richard Dawkins on this show also said, take a look at this.
I'm an atheist, but most evolutionists in America would probably pay lip service to the idea that there is no contradiction between them, and that people who want to believe in God do so long as they don't trespass on science's turf.
What's the best thing you can say about faith?
Not a lot. I mean, I think faith is pernicious because it teaches people, especially teaches children, that believing something without evidence is a virtue. And in extreme cases, it teaches people
Or is it just believing about one thing as a virtue?
Either way, I think it's a bit pernicious, because I think that children should be taught to seek evidence. They should be taught to be skeptical. If they're told something, they should immediately say, what's the evidence for that? Whereas faith teaches you not to ask for the evidence. It teaches you this is true because it's true because it's true. You just have faith and you don't have to justify it.
Richard